Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Podcast Daily. It is Tuesday. I am in Atlanta. Bill Landis is in Columbus. But it's a Tuesday, and there's still a press conference. And even if he can't go to ask the questions, it's offensive media day for the Buckeyes. We still have to know what questions would Bill ask, and that way Berm and I can do that. I didn't even get to ask a question to Ryan Day on Monday for some reason. So now that question for me will carry over to Tuesday.
Yeah, funny to me that you, the guy who's in Atlanta, didn't get to ask Ryan Day a question. Meanwhile, I actually did get through. Me, who's not there and not credentialed for the Peach Bowl, got through to ask a question.
Well, I mean, that's as it should be. You need to get your one opportunity because there was only one Zoom bizarrely scheduled for this week. I think there were a number of people that tried to take advantage of that by still driving down and not, I don't know, planning out their coverage for the week. But who am I to say? It doesn't really matter. But Berm and I did arrive. We did participate in the Zoom. And on Tuesday, later on Tuesday morning, this morning, I guess, we're going to go out there and talk to Ohio State offensive coordinator Kevin Wilson / Tulsa head coach, I guess. We'll get some insight on that. And a handful of offensive players, expecting, of course, that C.J. Stroud will be leading the way there. Don't know exactly yet. Haven't seen the list from the Peach Bowl people about the exact roster for Ohio State. But it doesn't matter. Bill's questions can cover all of that. And I think I know what the number one is on his mind right now.
Yeah, based off what I was asking Ryan Day on Monday and Kate Stover as well. It is the thing that is front of mind for me as it pertains to Ohio State's offense in this game, which is how fast are they going to play? Because I don't know if too fast is an answer in this kind of matchup with the way that Georgia wants to make late checks. I don't think they go about their business quite in the same way that Clemson and Brent Venables did back in 2019 and 2020 when Ohio State played them in the playoff, if you catch my drift. But they are a defense that likes to see where you're in and make those calls late and kind of gain the upper hand nonetheless. And I think Ohio State can be helped by, I don't know if it's playing fast all the time. Maybe it's mixing tempos more than anything else. I think we've talked about that maybe at various points in the lead up to this game, and we'll continue to do so. But I am curious about how Kevin Wilson views that.
It's a mind meld.
Yes, it's a mind meld. Yes, the collective brain trust is Kevin Day. How he views that, and CJ too, because he's the one calling the shots. And there has been times throughout this year where I think tempo has been really effective for them. Like the fourth quarter of the Penn State game keeps coming to mind for me, where they scored on like a 3-play 75-yard touchdown drive that took like 90 seconds. And I'm not saying you have to be that effective with it all the time, but there have been other times too where they tried to play fast and you get false start penalties. So like what's that balance there? And maybe if you do have false start penalties because you're a team that doesn't really major in tempo, if this month leading up to this game allowed you to get more comfortable doing so that you can avoid those kind of miscues.
Yeah, I think it is pretty interesting to look at it from that defensive perspective and who you're matching up with and the way they want to do business. Like, it doesn't matter if you are stealing signs, like perhaps Clemson may have been doing, and Ohio State was trying to avoid that part, or if you're just able to look out on the field and see what adjustment that offense may have been trying to make. Because I've brought this point up a couple times throughout the month. Seeing Michigan, it felt like they were responding after Ryan Day was and the guys on the sideline, the rest of those assistants and quality controls and analysts and everybody signaling in plays. It did feel like to me there were times that Michigan would let them do that and then make their adjustment, whether that was because they saw something and wanted to adjust, or whether they were bluffing an original call to try and get Ohio State to do that. I don't know. I mean, you and Berm are much more sharp with the X's and O's than I am, but I do know when I see Ohio State send in a sign and then C.J. Stroud get the call, go back to the line of scrimmage, and then Michigan decide they're going to add 2 guys to the box and Ohio State runs it right into it, that's probably a pretty big point for the defense to score in that chess match. So that's a mixed metaphor. You don't score points in chess that way, I don't think. So, but I feel like because Ohio State has been less willing to push the tempo, as you're talking about, they've got themselves into some issues with their play calling that way and become more predictable based on their own adjustments.
Yeah, I think you can overthink things just a little bit when you're trying to be perfect on every snap, and by that I mean the perfect call for what you think they're calling on defense, sometimes you're going to be right. Like we've seen Ryan Day be right, maybe probably more often than he's been wrong when he's trying to do that. But
Right.
I think it can slow you down mentally. I think it can put maybe undue pressure on you to execute it when you know you're going back and forth trying to find a perfect play, as opposed to just playing faster. Now, I don't say that because I don't want Ohio State to like go out there and have like a 3-and-out that takes 30 seconds off the clock, because that's no good either. We've seen teams do that against Ohio State, and that's a bad way to live. Like, you have to be strategic about it. But I just think Ohio State would be much better served in this game if it's not doing that kind of chess match where it's trying to find the perfect play to beat whatever Kirby Smart calls, and just sort of going out there playing fast, probably even playing simple, and kind of dictating the terms to Georgia in a way that we've just not seen them do, I think, maybe enough of this year. It's not that they've not done it at all. I just think you and I and probably a lot of other people feel like they can do it much more than they have. And if you were ever going to really lean into it, this seems like the opportune time to do so.
Do you think it's just because they've had the penalty issues and procedural problems that, like, it that can't be it, right? If you ran into that issue, and what if it would only be 5, 6, 7 times, which is a lot. You don't want to have that many false starts, but it doesn't seem like that's enough of a problem that you would just throw your hands up and say, well, we can't ever do tempo because DeJuan Jones had a false start. Like, it's almost, It has to be more of a philosophical issue than just false starts.
I would hope so. I would hope that it is, but I do think a tendency of Ryan Day is to kind of scrap something the second it doesn't work. And frankly, there are some times where things do work really well, but it's like, I'm going to sprinkle this in here to see if it works, keep you off balance. It worked. I don't care. We're moving on to the next thing. We're never going to go back to that again. And I think maybe that goes back to some of the things we've talked about in terms of feel for the game. Like, it's college football. Mistakes are going to happen. And it's not to say that they're excusable, especially on a stage like this. But I also think you sort of have to trust your players at a certain point to start figuring some things out. And if you thought coming into a game like this, like, tempo is the way to go, we have to play faster, and then on the first drive you get a false start, I don't think that's a reason to go away from it. I think you still need to empower your players to kind of execute the plan that you had worked for up until this point. But I do think sometimes at the first sight of something going wrong, Ryan Day probably abandons it and leans back on things that have worked better in the past.
Do you want Bermanite to ask CJ Stroud what he thinks about his legacy?
No, I think we're all good there.
Oh, okay.
He's had enough. He's had enough of that, I think, over the last month. I find CJ is difficult to ask questions of sometimes, because, like, if you're not on point, he can like kind of dismiss it. I think, like if you were to ask him a question about something that he could do in a game and you don't ask it the right way, he might like take it as a slight of you saying that you think he's bad at something. So, but it's really difficult, I think, sometimes to not come off that way, even if it's not your intention. But I would very much like to have a conversation with him this week, if I could, about the level of playmaking that I think is required of quarterbacks on stages like this. And and I think you probably saw some of it too in the conference championship games. I know, like, Caleb Williams lost, but like he put on a little bit of a clinic, I think, in playmaking. Cameron Rising did in that game as well. Stetson Bennett did, and I think it got him into the Heisman conversation. Whether you think that's right or wrong, I think that's part of the thing that put him there. And CJ is a tremendous thrower of the football when everything around him is clean and plays are happening on time. But there are going to be moments in this game, I'm assuming, because Georgia's very good, where it's going to be on his shoulders to get out of his comfort zone a little bit, perhaps, and make plays. And that's not necessarily running the ball. It's just doing things off of schedule and off of platform that I think sometimes he'd prefer not to do that, because he knows he's so good at hanging in there and throwing the ball down the field. If there's anything instructive about watching quarterbacks perform on this stage, even Justin 2 years ago, I think, did that against Clemson. If he learned anything watching those games, Justin's probably the best example. If he learned anything watching those games that make him think he's got to approach this one a little bit differently.
Yeah, it probably will. And then I think that the two examples you used are also probably in the back of his mind. Caleb Williams hurt his hamstring and was not as effective for the rest of that. And that game turned the second that Caleb Williams pulled up lame against Utah. And Justin Fields did everything in his power against Clemson and probably beyond that, and really some superhuman resiliency that particular night. But he was not the same in the national championship because of the shot to the hip and the lower back. And that's not for me to that. I'm not bringing that up to say that CJ Stroud is afraid of getting hurt. I'm not. And I'm not bringing it up again to say that Ryan Day will tell him not to run in this game, because this is the time that you should, and you probably have to against Georgia. But this does always go back in the end to what Ohio State allows and teaches its quarterback to do. And I know that the situation when you get into a high-stakes game like this is different, and that if there's a first down and you have to sacrifice to get it, that CJ Stroud is going to have to do that. Georgia's defense is too good to just think that every time you extend a play, you could turn down 6 yards, 7 yards, or an opportunity to move the chains. But it's just like the risk and reward of it in the end. Right? You're getting to the end of the season and you're playing for a trophy. This is different. I understand. But when you put yourself in that jeopardy, that can come at a cost. So you'd have to get down, you'd have to protect yourself, or I don't know, maybe get some help from your receivers to break loose and get some scramble drills that are successful down the field. It feels like I'm advocating for him not to run, and I guess to some extent I am. You have to do it in a smart, protective fashion, and he just doesn't have the experience at that. And I don't know that you can just flip that on the first time in the Peach Bowl against the number one team in the country. And that's probably not how Ohio State will win the game.
That's a good point, and I do think you're right in the fact that the ability to protect oneself as a quarterback, I think, only comes through probably getting hit pretty hard one time in the middle of the field when you don't want to.
Yeah,
and frankly, like I would like even Justin Fields, for as gifted as he was as an athlete at Ohio State, I think was not always great about knowing how to protect himself because
or
he just
slide for some reason,
or slide, as
a baseball player.
Yeah. Yeah. So CJ, to my knowledge, is not a baseball player. He was a basketball player. I do think he is a better athlete than he's given credit for. But we've also seen him, lower his throwing shoulder into somebody near the sideline against, what was that, Indiana? It's like, you can't do that, man. Like I think he does get. I think he hears the criticism sometimes and wants to show that he's willing to do that stuff, but it can't come at the expense of doing something foolish like lowering your throwing shoulder against Indiana in a game you're going to win by 50 when you're near the pylon, or near the first down marker. So he does have to strike that balance because he can't. It's not running for the sake of running to prove a point. It's running when it is necessary to keep your team alive in a playoff game, and I do think he's going to have to do some of that, but it also doesn't mean it has to turn into a game where all of a sudden CJ Stroud has 13 carries for 80 yards. Maybe it does become that. I'm not saying it, but I'm just saying it doesn't need to be that, but he needs to maybe have that clock on going in the back of his mind. Like, okay, 1's not there, 2's not there. I can probably try to get the 3, but Georgia's really good. It's time to run. Like, you just can't take negative plays against this defense.
Yeah. And we know how that conversation is going to go with him. Like, he's had it a number of times, and the most famous example is going back to Nebraska last year. I'm not a running back, and like I don't believe that Ryan Day is suddenly going to go into this game and dial up a bunch of zone read run plays with that CJ can pull and has the option to pull and actually does that. Like, I don't think that would be a formula for Ohio State to win this game. And again, as you said, it's not because he's not athletic enough to do it some. He is. I think and maybe this is just not the right mentality, and Ohio State would be better off emptying every bullet and going into this game and doing whatever it takes to win. And that's probably a fair way to look at it. But the other way is perhaps a more practical one, which is if you do anything that you can to get one first down, and then your Heisman Trophy finalist quarterback has to go to the sideline, and Kyle McCord has to go out and try and win you a college football playoff semifinal. Yeah. That's also not Ohio State in Ohio State's best interest to win the game. Again, that's not to say that Kyle McCord is not capable of doing so, but it's not maximizing Ohio State's potential. And I think that's when you look at all this conversation that we always have about how much Dwayne Haskins should run, how much Justin Fields should run, how much CJ Stroud should run. It always comes back eventually to, I think, Ohio State wanting to mitigate the risk because it just is built around the passing attack, and it wants to protect that at all costs. And I get that. Where everybody is frustrated, I also get when it's 7 free yards and no one around. Those are the plays that you cannot deny. But if there's an opportunity and you have to get 8, maybe dropping your shoulder to get it is not worth it, and you get 6 and play a more field possession game against Georgia. I'm not saying that CJ's legs are the win-at-all-cost option, because I think it does, even within the same game, come at an expense that Ohio State's not willing to pay and probably shouldn't pay.
Yeah, I think you're right, and also too, it's not just about CJ running. You can extend plays without running past the line of scrimmage, and I think there have been good examples of Ohio State in the scramble drill this year, but I wouldn't call it particularly crisp at times, just because they don't rep it a ton. I remember having that conversation when Justin got here in 2019, like receivers having to adjust to his willingness to want to extend plays, and CJ does not do it on nearly that level. But I think there could be opportunities to do more of it. I think of the Notre Dame game. That's probably CJ's best example of doing stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it looked pretty good. It looked pretty good in that game. But it's like that game was really good, and then I feel like it's never quite been to that point since then. So like, if CJ's not going to run it a dozen times, and I really don't think he should, can Ohio State kind of get back to what it was doing in that game when it seemed to know that extending plays are going to be at a premium, and the receivers and running backs and tight ends seem to adjust in kind, and they were able to move the ball a little bit that way when CJ was kind of throwing off of broken plays that weren't necessarily quarterback runs or scrambles. So I think that's part of the conversation too.
Yeah, that first play that instantly came to mind for me, and I can't off the top of my head think of a ton of other examples throughout the course of the year, which is a little bit of the problem, was the throw to Mayan Williams on the key drive against Notre Dame, and the sort of magic bullet that he flipped out. Like, we saw him reverse, his footwork, spin out of the pressure, go towards the sideline, get help from a bit of a broken route there from Mayan Williams, which is not the sort of player that we even thought would be doing that. A lot of things that happened at once there were like, well, this is quite a new wrinkle for Ohio State's offense, and it never really came to fruition again. This is, again, a very, very good defense that's going to force you to make some plays that are off schedule, outside of the system. So, I'm curious what else you would have in mind for that offense going into a Tuesday offensive media day spectacular down here before we move on with our lives.
What you wanted to ask on Monday of Ryan Day, we didn't get the question to ask, which is like, what's up with Matthew Jones
Right.
and Josh Fryer and Enoch Vimahi, and just I don't anticipate, even if you did get the chance to ask Ryan Day, if he would have given a concrete answer there. But in a setting like the one that you guys are going to be on Tuesday, it's a much better setting, I think, to sort of pick up on vibes too, of like, well, depending on how guys answer questions, you might know how Matt Jones has looked. And if you ask about Josh Fryer, Enoch Vimahi, you can probably get a reasonable understanding of how things have progressed in practice. So that's honestly probably number 2 in my mind, behind the tempo stuff that I started with. And then
Sure.
I'd probably progress to CJ playmaking stuff third.
Yeah, I think that I wanted to phrase it in a way, and I still will later on today, like, they're not going to specifically say, hey, Matthew Jones is now 89%. The foot still hurts. It's going to. He's going to wear clown shoes, but he's going to play and he's going to start. The question was going to be more like, do you know what the plan is? Like, because I've said this all month long, and I still feel that way now that the game is 5 days away. You cannot waste a series trying to find out if Matthew Jones can go. You can't waste a series trying to rotate and see, well, we like Enoch Vimahi in this matchup right now a little bit better than Josh Fryer. You can't play 3 guards in this game unless you are forced to. Do you know, Ohio State, what you intend to do at guard, so that you aren't out in the first quarter trying to experiment and feel it out? Because if you do, I got a feeling that Jalen Carter is going to make all 3 of those guys look bad at some point if you try to rotate and don't let them get into the flow. I don't think that's a bold prediction. I think that's probably just the reality of the situation. So I think, do you know what you want to do? Are you able to execute that plan? And if you're still uncertain, why are you uncertain? Because I would think that would be an easier question for them to answer at this point. I know that they're deep down, their preference is a healthy Matthew Jones. And if they want to try and wait till Thursday and Friday to know, I think that's a dicey game. They don't have to tell me what the plan is. I'm fine if they don't. There are a couple of viewing periods that are going to be available for us throughout this week. Maybe that will be when I get a much better feel for it. Maybe someone actually will address it head on and say that Matthew Jones with a month to get ready, they feel completely good about it. I don't know. But I don't the answer to that question for me cannot be we'll let you know on Friday. Like that's not I don't think that'll do it.
If that answer is a lie, that's fine, I guess. But if that answer is the truth
No,
and they don't know,
don't advocate for that, Bill. No.
Well, I'm just talking about in terms of Ohio State's success.
Okay.
If they want to play it close to the vest, I think that's fine. But I agree. Like there can't be game time decisions of that magnitude in this kind of game. And I think that's first and foremost at that position. Perhaps you can extend it to running back, although I think Mayan Williams is pretty much good to go or will be by the time that game starts. And otherwise they should be fine in all the other positions on both sides of the ball. But you just know like, oh, let's just see how it goes. Cause I can, if you put a guy out there who's not 100% against that defense and against Jalen Carter, I can tell you how it's going to go. It's not going to go real well. And you don't want to start the game off with a drive where you lose yardage and have to punt the ball to Georgia and all of a sudden then 7-0 before you've gotten to do anything on offense. So it is pivotal in this game that they know. I think by maybe even by now or at least by midweek that they know who's going to start at right guard, even if they don't want to tell us who it is.
Yeah, it's just such a weird thing to even try and keep hidden, right? Is it going to change the way Georgia prepares based on which lineman plays? Probably not. But the status report has been a bit of a joke all year. So why not continue that all the way up until kickoff on New Year's Eve, just for old time's sake? Bill, It is not the same down here without you. We miss you. We're pulling for the Landis clan, though, to have a great week and a healthy one at that. We're going to keep having Bill on the daily all week long. That's going to be his home. He's going to break everything down as always with the X's and O's. And then we're going to try and get him some answers for the questions that he has at Ohio State media availability down here in Atlanta at the Peach Bowl. We miss you, but we're glad that we're going to be able to use this magical technology to record podcasts all week.
Yeah, me too. I do wish I was down there. It's very weird. It's very weird not being down there, but obviously I have more important things to tend to. No offense to you guys or to the Peach Bowl, but I need to be here in case my child decides that they want to show up earlier than they are expected to. So
probably like 8 p.m. on Saturday night. Sounds like a great time.
Most likely, yeah.
All right. Well, that's Bill Landis. I'm Austin Ward. This has been the Podcast Daily on Tuesday. A lot more coverage coming your way down here from Atlanta. We'll have some Roosters Bowl reports coming, have some interviews with Ohio State offensive players, and whatever else we can come up with. And then we'll be back with Bill for the Wednesday version. We'll talk about the Ohio State defense before that availability, and we'll do that all week long on the Podcast Daily. For Bill, I'm Austin. We'll talk to you later.